Next from Chicago, our contributing correspondent Jeff Berkowitz talks with Andrea Zopp, president of the Chicago Urban League, as they discuss race relations in America, educational choice, and gun violence in Chicago's minority communities. This runs about 30 minutes.
Is it all about race? Is it all about skin pigmentation? Or do whites sometimes run into similar problems? Do they sometimes walk through a black neighborhood and they are profiled as a white person and they get in this difficult situation and react the wrong way, they may get shot? Is it all about race, and does it happen flip side, or is it only about blacks?
No, I think unfortunately in America, there's a perception around young African American men that is that feeds fear and the unknown. And no, I don't think it happens to your typical white youth, whether they're in a black community or not. They may feel uncomfortable because, unlike for the first time in their lives, they may be feeling like they are a minority, but I don't think it's because the African Americans are going to treat them differently. That doesn't mean that African Americans are, perfect and we don't have biases. That's not really the point. But I think to suggest that, what happened, that the issues for African Americans are not real, or somehow that they're true for everybody is really missing our history, which was the other point that the president was making. He talked about the history for African Americans. And people have to remember, we're not that far removed. We're barely a generation, we're not even a generation removed from legalized segregation and discrimination. My parents grew up in a segregated world. They had
Jim
to go
Crow laws you're talking about.
They had
in
to
the
go
South,
to
in the South.
In the North.
In the North we had Jim Crow laws?
We had segregated schools.
De facto, not de jure?
No, de jure. I mean,
I
went to school, I graduated from college at went high school in 1974, went to college in Boston. They had just ordered desegregation of the public schools there with busing. And,
right, but wasn't
they were literally standing outside throwing stones at the buses of kids. So yes, the law, it was not legalized segregation.
It was a neighborhood that was black,
Right.
and kids were going to black schools there, and the way to achieve integration, some government officials said, as I recall, in Boston, was to bus kids who were white from white neighborhoods into black neighborhoods and vice versa. It wasn't in the South where you had a black kid bypass a school that was nearby and be told to go to another school simply because he or she was black.
I think you skip some stuff around. You skip some stuff around. Why were there all black neighborhoods and all white neighborhoods? That didn't happen accidentally either.
Isn't that a socioeconomic issue to a large extent?
No, it to some extent, but if you read, for example, the book right now in Chicago on the book of the month or the year that we're reading or month is The Warmth of Other Suns. Talks a lot about how our neighborhoods were segregated, how when African Americans moved in, white people moved out, and African Americans were prevented from moving into
there were
white
Italian neighborhoods in Chicago, and there were German neighborhoods, and there were Jewish neighborhoods. So wasn't it segregated to a large extent by ethnicity, not just by color?
Not completely. No.
Not completely, but you would agree that there was a lot of ethnic segregation in addition to
I think there are ethnic
white.
neighborhoods, but
Right.
I wouldn't align that with the discrimination that. Let's put it this way: I don't think that. Well, I'm not going to.
How do we get beyond this? Because as I said, we're taping this on July 20th, 2013. So 1964 was the Civil Rights Act. Some quick math, that's about 47 years ago, right?
Right.
That's like landmark legislation, right?
That was just significantly undercut by the Supreme Court. So,
because of the Voting Rights Act decision of 65. I don't want to make the whole show about it, but there is a counterpoint, because that law said because the South had segregation and other negative aspects so ingrained, when they made various changes that might be an attempt to bring back or maintain those harmful and deleterious and not approved procedures for voting, the government was going to look at those, was it 9 states in particular.
Right.
And now people said, like, a lot's changed, and that in many of these states, blacks are almost a majority. They're running governments. The world is so different than it was in 1965. I didn't read the Supreme Court opinion, but I'm guessing they said that's why the Voting Rights Act needs to be modified, because these people who we couldn't trust then Now we can. Indeed, many of the people in government are black.
Except the fact is, there are many majority still Republican legislatures, and in fact, in both of the last 2 elections, there were laws passed that restrict voting rights, and those laws mostly impact, by the way, people of color and youth, the people who supported Barack Obama. The Justice Department stepped in repeatedly in 2008 and in 2012 to overturn restrictive voting laws in those states and others. So the idea that, yes, the world has changed since 1964, but the idea that there are not still restrictions put on voting rights that impact people of color, where were people standing in lines? Giant lines, hours to vote. And what color were those people? They weren't white. They weren't white communities.
Well,
they were largely, or they were
some.
Very few. You didn't see any lines of
these things are often a matter of income. And you know, high-income neighborhoods, people tend
Jeff,
not to wait to vote.
You can call it whatever you want. When the color of the people in the line is brown or black, I call that race. So you can call it what you want.
So you're saying empirically documented, as far as you know, blacks were in large part the victims of discrimination in the 2008-2012 elections.
I'm saying that there were voting laws passed that limited the rights of African Americans and people of color.
Required identification, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Like you have to show your license. Like I have to show my ID.
Which for many African Americans or older African Americans, they don't have. And the Justice Department stepped in and stopped a lot of that. So the point is, the idea that it's not needed or relevant is, frankly, shocking.
Here's the point, okay? You went to Harvard. You went to the Harvard Law School. You became a general counsel at Exelon and at Sears, and held high business positions outside the law department. You were state's attorney, the first assistant state's attorney in Cook County to, as I recall, a Republican named Jack O'Malley. You put Mel Reynolds in jail. And when Mel Reynolds went in jail, there was a special election in Congress, and Jesse Jackson, as I recall, replaced him. And Reynolds had replaced Gus Savage because of ethical issues, all in the 2nd Congressional District. And now Robin Kelly has replaced Congressman Jackson, who had to resign.
And your point is what?
Well, my point is life is very different. Robin Kelly is a very different person than Gus Savage.
That would be true.
And you're a very different person than people who were of color, who didn't have these opportunities 50 years ago. You are now an important member on the CPS, the Chicago Public Schools Board of Education. You are now an important person who's president and CEO of the Chicago Urban League. The Chicago Urban League is an historic institution that's been around for almost 100 years. You now have power now to do something about jobs. You have power to do something about helping people get better educated. You have enormous power. You have much more power than I could ever hope to have. Okay, seriously, right?
I don't know that. I can't say. I don't disagree with you that the world we have made significant progress
And yet, 1 out of every, I think the statistic is right, Robin Staines, you know Robin Staines, right?
Yes.
Advanced Illinois. Approximately, I'm paraphrasing, when she sat in your chair and she sat on this show, she said approximately 1 out of every 5 black kids in 4th grade reads at grade level, and for Hispanics it's pretty similar, and they are about 85% of the CPS education. And I want to know what you're doing about that. Because frankly, I think that is much more troublesome, and I could be wrong. And I don't have the same history you and other blacks have, and other minorities. But to me, that statistic is way more troublesome than even a young 17-year-old who may have been innocently shot. Terrible as it is, hundreds of thousands of kids are not learning how to read, and I don't hear you or anybody saying anything about that. Well, and I want to know why.
You're not hearing anything. You haven't heard anything because you're not listening.
Well, so, I was at the school board meeting when it was decided to close 50 schools and 30,000 students would be affected.
If you were there, then you heard me say a number of things that included my focus was on what disturbed me. If you were sat in the room, then you would have heard me say the following thing. What disturbs me most isn't that we're closing schools. What disturbs me is that we have huge swaths of neighborhoods, African American neighborhoods, where we have no quality schools, where the parents do not have a choice to send their kids to quality schools. That is what we have to fix.
I missed that, and I apologize. And I apologize if you said that. I very much apologize.
I did say that, and I have been saying it throughout on my conversations.
You're saying they don't have a choice.
They don't have for a quality school because we don't have one in those neighborhoods.
Why not? Why not? Because what?
Because we have a long history of understanding. Well, I've been on the board 2 years, Jeff, and in those 2 years, here's the things we've approved and supported: extended school day, evaluation of teachers. So that and a new contract that allows for teachers to be come back in based on their performance. That's the first time that's ever happened. So instead of time in job, how you come back in off of a layoff is based on performance, how you're evaluated. That's never happened. We're going to have a common core so that we can be clear about what we're going to teach our students. We have a school for principals so we can identify principals. So we have done many things. We are trying to address a very, very difficult budget challenge, which people are very upset about, as are we. But the fact that there's no pension reform means that we have a $600 million pension bill this year at CPS, up from.
And whose fault is that? Whose fault is that you have that kind of payment, that kind of outlandish sum is being paid that you can't meet, okay? And it's not, and nothing's being done to reduce that payment. Whose fault is that?
I would say that the fact that the state legislature hasn't addressed the pension structure in the
and
state as a whole.
Whose fault is that?
Well, I don't know. I can't. I just said the
state.
Come on,
you know.
I just said the state.
Who runs the state of Illinois?
I just said the state legislature. It's a legislative decision.
No,
so.
Mike Madigan runs with John Cullerton, the state of Illinois. You know that. Would you want to teach the kids otherwise at CPS?
I would like
Those two guys run things.
I
right?
would like to teach the kids that the state legislature, including its leadership, need to make a decision, which is what we've been saying. So I'm not, I don't think it's necessary to name names, but the point is...
Why can't we name names?
Because the point is they're all accountable. The state needs to address...
Mike Madigan's the most powerful politician in the state of Illinois. You know that. He's been speaker now basically for 3 decades. He's chairman of the Illinois Democratic Party. He's able to tell people at Metro what to do, and when they don't, get fired, okay?
Well, Jeff,
you know this. This.
I'm not gonna that's not the point that I came to talk about.
Well,
you asked me what the issue is. I told you we need to have pension reform in the state. That sits in the hands of the legislature.
Don't you think you would be a person to put pressure on Mike Madigan and John Cullerton?
I think putting pressure on their individual legislator that they have a say in electing, that's who they should be putting pressure on.
Don't you think you would be a person to bring about school choice so that these kids could? You said they didn't have a choice, and I apologize, I missed that now, but you've reiterated that. You said these kids, their schools are closing, and they don't have a choice to go to a good school.
No, that's not what I said, so let's be clear.
Oh,
what I said, what I said was, in many neighborhoods on the south and west side, we don't have, all of the schools there are underperforming, and we need to fix those schools.
Well, why can't we know? Well, why? Why don't we give them a choice to leave the schools? Because, when Orville Faubus stood in Arkansas and said, this black kid coming in this school because then it's not happening, I'm not having integration, okay, that was wrong. And now when Democratic politicians stand in the school door and say to black kids, you're not leaving because we want your money, and if you want to have school choice, and if you want to go to a school, a private school of your choice, if you want to take the $15,000 that we're spending per kid per year in the CPS, the Democratic politicians are saying, no, you can't go. When Reverend Meeks said, and he got the Black Caucus to help the bottom 10% with school choice, and he spent $6,000, not $15,000, the Democratic politicians, I'm sorry, I'm not partisan because I'm not Republican or Democrat, but if you study this, if you know the facts, it was the Democratic Party who disproportionately blocked those kids from having an opportunity to get an improved school. Okay, and they continue to block that.
I just want to be clear, I don't agree with pretty much everything you said. So,
Tell me what I said was wrong.
I just don't agree with it. So
Yeah,
my
what was
point is,
wrong?
I'm
What
not
was-
going to debate you point by point, Jeff. Okay, you asked me my view. Tell me, I believe in neighborhood schools. I believe in public schools. I think we can and we are turning it around. And I think that's what we have to do. So I don't agree with you that school choice fixes everything, and that
do you believe in
assumes
school choice?
that
Do you believe in
assumes
school
that
vouchers?
assumes that no, I don't. I support the public school system that we have. I don't think school vouchers solves every problem.
Do you believe in charter schools?
Absolutely.
Okay. And about how many students do we have in charter schools right now
I don't
in
know.
the Chicago public schools?
I don't have. It's some
My understanding
microcosm.
is it's 52,000 students out of
It's a
400,000.
small, tiny percentage
Right.
of the
Would you like
students.
to see maybe 50,000 or 100,000 more kids
I don't have-
an opportunity to go to charter schools?
I don't have a number on the schools, Jeff. What I believe in charter schools is that those that work, and by the way, as you know, not all of them do, are good options for students. I believe every child should have a choice to go to a quality school, and that's what I think we need to do. And I believe charters are part of that, creating that option for students, and that's why I think they're relevant. But how many should that be? I don't know. And they have to work, which, by the way, let's be clear, they don't all work. So the word charter, just like the word choice, so we're clear, doesn't mean necessarily that you're getting a quality school option. So.
Okay. Would you be willing to take a look at this book by Herb Wahlberg on school choice, which traces many studies of charter schools up through 2007? Would you be willing to read that?
Sure.
Okay. Would you be willing to look at the CREDO study, that Center for Research on Educational Outcomes coming out of Hoover Institution, which was published in the last year and is on the Illinois Network of Charter Schools website? That's INC Schools, inc.schools.org or .com, I'll have to check. So that's about a 50-page study that shows that on average, and I'm paraphrasing now and summarizing, blacks and Hispanics are disproportionately helped by charter schools. In some cases, over a year, they may get an advantage of a charter school relative to a traditional public school. They're both public schools. 2 weeks more learning, 1 month more learning in reading and math. Would you be willing to look at that study? And if you became convinced that that study was in fact valid, that maybe that would motivate you to push more for charter schools?
Let me say two things that I think I said. I'm familiar with the study. I think that there are good charter schools that provide great results for students. And we should, when we can, those should be a part of any plan we have for schools to increase our students' choices. Here's the thing, fixing schools is hard. So if we can't get those schools, the neighborhoods where we have too many underperforming schools, if you can't get them fixed, then I think charter has to be an option. But your assumption that by virtue of it calling it a charter makes it a great school choice for kids, I don't agree with that.
It's not assumption, because I'm just pointing to studies. And you're
And
saying you're familiar with the study.
I can tell you right now that there are charters that don't work.
No, right.
So,
on average, what this is saying,
well, but on average, you can't look at it on average.
No, you can, because
you can. I can't. So
you
let's put it
can't?
that way. No, I can't.
Isn't that we learn in school that we have to talk statistics?
Because what if you're the kid that's going to the school that's not in the average, Jeff?
Well, if
you're still going to an underperforming school, so it doesn't really matter. So for that kid, on average is an irrelevant thing.
No, but
the question here is, are the kids getting access to a quality education? So it doesn't, on average, doesn't mean anything to me. I get that there are good charter schools that work for kids. I get that assumption.
Who should make the choices?
Who should make what choices?
The choices about where their kids go to school.
The parents should make the choices where their kids go to school. But my job as a member of the board, and CPS's job, is to make sure, to do what we can to make sure that the schools we run are quality schools, and that's what we're doing.
Does the Chicago Urban League, you're the president and CEO, you've been there for 3 years, does that institution support charter schools?
That we don't support charter schools per se. We support access to quality education for our kids. We support making sure that we fund the schools the way that they need to be funded. So as you know, we fund schools in Illinois based on property taxes. It's the Urban League's view, and we have a lawsuit on that right now, that system is discriminatory against minorities and needs to be changed. It impacts children of color disparately, and therefore it's unconstitutional. And fighting that lawsuit for 6 years.
How much do we spend per kid per year in the Chicago public schools?
I don't know. I don't have that number.
Does the $6 billion budget, does that sound roughly right? $6 billion?
I'm sure it's billions. I don't know what the number
billion.
is.
It could be 5.3. It could be 6.1.
I don't know.
But trust me,
exactly.
I'm telling you, it's $6 billion. Does 400,000 students sound about right as to the total number of students in CPS?
Yes, I think that's about right.
So if you divide 400,000 into $6 billion, you get $15,000 per kid per year, counting all costs. Do you think that's enough to educate a kid and teach that kid how to read and write and do math?
Well, of course, as you know, not the $15,000. Not all that $15,000 goes directly to the kid's education. So that's your cost.
Where does it go?
Well, it goes to the administrators. It goes to running other programs. It goes to the finance people who do the budget. All of whom, by the way, have been significantly cut in the last several years. So.
But if we could say to the parents, you said you thought you'd like to. I think you said the parents should make the choice. If we could say to the parents, here's $15,000. If you're happy with what Chicago public schools are doing, just keep your kid in the school. But if you want to leave, take your $15,000.
And where would they go, Jeff, if there's no Chicago public school system?
Where would they go?
Yeah.
Well,
if you take the $15,000 out of the public school system, where would the parents go?
There would be new schools that would arise.
And where would those schools go? And how do we know? And you're sure those schools would be in the neighborhoods of the children of color?
Because you know what? They would have purchasing power, and whenever there is purchasing power, we know that the market responds. And if you have each parent having $15,000 to spend at the school of his or her choice, Andrea, I will open a school on the south side of Chicago. And the people who are more than qualified would do this. And you know the market works. You studied this. You're a Harvard Law School grad.
I don't know that the market always works for people of color, Jeff. I don't know that. I don't know
when
that
they
it
have
works
purchasing
for poor
power.
people.
When they have
I don't
purchasing
know that
power?
it works for poor people and people of color. And
But
I can
when
have
they're
lots
poor,
of
when they don't have
examples.
money, when they don't have money, but I want to give them the money.
Lots of examples. Look, if you want to continue to talk about school choice, we can. My position is I don't agree with you. You're not going to get me to agree with you today, so would you like to talk about some other things, or would you like to continue to argue for school choice? Which you can. You're not going to change my mind.
No, I'm just surprised you're as closed-minded as you seem to say you are. I mean, I'm happy to give you time to talk.
I don't know that disagreeing with you. No, you want to, I've said what I have to say. I don't agree with many of your assumptions. I don't agree that it works the way you say it. I wish that fixing the schools was as simple as you think it is, but it's not. And I just
one last thing, and then we'll go on. Since we haven't tried school vouchers, and we've had reform now for Chicago public school reform.
There are places that have tried school vouchers.
Milwaukee, and they seem to work. Cleveland, they seem to work. Florida, they seem to work. You don't think they work in Milwaukee?
I don't know. I don't know about Milwaukee.
Cleveland? You don't think they work in Cleveland?
I don't know that they're working the way you're saying they're working. So I don't.
Again, take a look at what Herb Wahlberg's written, a lot on charter schools, some on vouchers. There's lots published. You know, take a look at Carolyn Hawksby from Harvard, now at Stanford. I'm not making this stuff up. There's a lot of studies.
I'm not suggesting that you are making it up, Jeff. I just think you're, as many people do who support school choice, taking the facts that work for you.
No, I'm admitting that there's not.
And leaving them and framing them in a way that works for you.
My question to you is, what do you lose if you've had 18 years of failure, basically, in the Chicago public schools? If you have 1 out of every 5 kids reading at grade level in the 4th grade, are you afraid that if you had vouchers, it'll go down to 1 out of every 6?
I'm not
20% will go to 15. In other words, you have nothing to lose. Why would you not try something?
We have the loss of the public education system, Jeff. That's what we lose.
Aren't the kids in the public school system more important?
And neighborhood schools for our
because
kids.
Again, if you have money, if you have purchasing power, if you're saying people don't have purchasing power, of course markets don't work if there's no money. But don't you think $15,000 per kid per year would be a lot of purchasing power if you fully give that to them? I'll come back, we'll try to cover these other things, but to me, maybe I'm being odd here, I think there's nothing more important than helping kids have a chance to learn to read. And 1 out of 5 is such a terrible statistic. I would think you would jump and say, if I could make that, Jeff, 2 out of 5, that would be great.
Jeff, the assumption that I don't care about kids reading.
I'm not saying
improving the schools.
I know you care. I'm not imputing your motives. I'm saying, but why not try something? Why not take a chance? Because you have nothing to lose.
Because I don't believe it will work, and I think it will ultimately harm students of color.
And what is the Urban League? One push is on education. And what you're saying, mostly what the Urban League is doing is on funding, on education.
I said that's
on education.
I said that's one of the many things we do. No, we have programming in schools. We do advocacy work. We work with kids from a middle school all the way through college directly in making sure that they stay in school and that they're successful in school. We help kids get into college. We do scholarship.
How many kids do you help a
money.
year in doing that?
The total number of kids in our program is somewhere in between 300 and 500, depending on
300 and 500, and yet you have 200,000 or 300,000 who are in failing schools at CPS. And you think, I mean, I don't mean to denigrate that, but
well, you
300
just
to 500.
did,
well,
but
because
that's okay.
it's such a small amount.
No, it's not. Not for those kids.
Because
Jeff,
you have
it's
this
easy
power.
for you to say because it's not you. Because you got an education. You didn't have to deal with some of the issues that day. So it's really easy for you to say, you know what, those kids don't matter.
But no, they do matter. And if I could help 300, that's better than helping none. But I'm just saying, with the power that you have, with the voice that you have, with the megaphone that you have, why not try to help 20,000, 50,000, 100,000?
I am doing that, Jeff. You just don't like the way that I'm doing it because it's not what you would do.
At the Urban League, you're doing that?
I'm doing that at the board, and we are doing that at the Urban League with the lawsuit that we have and the support for school reform that we've done. So yes, I think we are using the voice we have to fight for kids, as we have. We're just not doing it to fight for kids the way you would.
We're gonna continue to speak as the credits roll. We only have a few minutes. You tell me what we've missed. You tell me what people should know about the Urban League and CPS that give them hope. Okay.
We've missed tons of things about the Urban League. So Urban League's been around for 100 years working to improve the African American community. We work in a wide range of areas beyond education, including workforce, housing, entrepreneurship, and we work with businesses, and we are focused on making the African American community stronger, which is what we've done. So we've missed much of that. We've missed much of what
And you've been there 3 years. What has been the most notable, or 2 or 3 accomplishments in the last few years?
Well, we've been working with this. We worked with the CTA to ensure that millions of dollars on the funds that they're spending on the Red Line work went to African American businesses, and to ensure that hundreds of people living in that community got jobs, both skilled jobs on the project as well as bus driving jobs. We're doing that same work with Malcolm X City Colleges and their Malcolm X construction job, and actually with the PVC on the schoolwork. So,
and what are the most notable accomplishments at CPS while you've been on the board?
Well,
That's 2 years, is that right?
I went through them earlier, in terms of what we're doing in terms of longer school day, teacher evaluation, better principals, common core curriculum, so a whole host of things that I think will lead to better outcomes.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.